Right, I was doing some research for a recent video on the history of Reason Studios. While doing some digging, I ended up down a rabbit hole of audio plugins and how they became so synonymous with music production. That led me to make this video, which is looking at the entire history of the audio plugin. So to really understand where plugins came from, we first need to take a look at what came before them. Before digital recording existed, engineers would use analog hardware to capture, manipulate and mix sound. Instruments and vocals would be recorded onto analog tape machines. These machines took the signal from a microphone and converted the audio waves into magnetic energy. The tapes, usually containing iron oxide, would then be left with an impression of the audio signal. When played back on a tape machine, the impression would be converted back into an electrical signal that could then be amplified. Engineers would make use of mixing consoles and hardware processing units like EQs and compressors to fine-tune each microphone. It's actually crazy to think that this method of recording was used up until only 50 years ago. In the late 70s and early 80s, DSP or digital signal processing emerged, and this led to huge advancements in music production. It was in 1979 that a Sydney-based company named Fairlight Instruments would release the Fairlight CMI. This absolute behemoth of a machine is literally what you'd need to carry around with you if you wanted to sample something. It was marketed as a digital sampling synthesizer, but it was capable of polyphonic synthesis, digital recording and audio playback. All of this was visible in the state-of-the-art GUI, and the thing even had a stylus. One of its main selling points though was its real-time sampling feature. The Fairlight could record audio samples and map them out on a keyboard to be played back like an instrument. This was revolutionary at the time, as it meant organic instruments like pianos and guitars could be sampled, sequenced and manipulated all from the same machine. Some other notable machines that use DSP are the Lexicon 224 Reverb. This unit's thought to be the first commercially available reverb device, and the Casio VL1, which was the first commercially available digital synth. During this period, there were some early versions of DAWs emerging, but all of them still required very specific hardware. For example, the Soundstream digital recording system. This monster was developed throughout the 70s in Salt Lake City, Utah. Dr. Thomas G. Stockham Jr. had created a machine that could record and edit audio digitally. Prior to this, editing audio would literally mean cutting and splicing different tapes together. But the Soundstream boasted a digital storage system that would store the audio files without the need of magnetic tapes. To use this system though, you'd first need the mainframe computer that could run the software, the entire storage system, and then of course your recording and listening equipment. This was all about to change though, as we entered the software era of music production. So we're now in 1989. In California, engineers Evan Brooks and Peter Gotcha had developed a piece of software named Sound Tools. This could do all of the things that the Soundstream machine could do, but it could run on Macintosh systems as long as you had the required RAM and storage. The processors available were very limited, but users would have access to single track leveling and panning, simple EQ and compression tools, and control over the master output signal. Just a few years later, a company named DigiDesign would acquire Sound Tools and the technology behind it. DigiDesign would then rename the software to Pro Tools. Pro Tools would develop its own plugin format called time division multiplexing and opened it up to third-party developers. And just 1 year later, we'd see our first big player enter the picture. Waves had come up with an equalizer plugin that could be used inside of the Pro Tools software. And just look at this, the Q10 plugin literally shipped with a bunch of floppy disks and a binder. In 1994, Waves would then go on to release another plugin that's still around to this day called the L1 limiter. The mid-90s would also see the DirectX plugin format become popular, as it was supported in software like the Adobe Suite and Cakewalk, but the next huge advancement would come in 1996. Steinberg had just released update 3.02 of Cubase, and this included the very first VST plugins. For those of you that don't know, Steinberg are the company that created the VST plugin format. The plugins they released were a Spatial, which was a reverb plugin, Chorus, which was a chorus plugin, and then the Stereo Echo and Auto Panner plugins. Similar to the TDM format, Steinberg made the VST framework public and allowed third parties to start making VSTs. At this point, developers were working with very limited tools, but in 1999, Steinberg would release a new plugin format called VST 2.0. These plugins were far superior to their predecessors and supported full MIDI control, device automation, and tempo input for effects like delays and reverbs. This meant plugin companies had a lot more to work with, and of course led to a huge jump in the technology that we'd see in VST plugins. Alongside the VST 2.0 update, Steinberg would release the very first VSTi named Neon. This plugin was a 2-oscillator synthesizer that was quite basic but still substantial for the time. The third-party companies would get to work too, and in the early 2000s we'd see a boom in new plugins. Huge VST instruments like Omnisphere and Nexus would emerge, and these plugins came with huge sound libraries that offered some of the highest quality sounds for the time. We'd also see some of the iconic processing VSTs come out, such as the Fab Filter and Ozone plugins. Sampler plugins would benefit hugely from the VST2 update, as time syncing slices and effects had become a lot easier. Kontakt will release in 2002, and to this day it remains one of the most advanced sampler plugins on the market. Third parties like East West and Best Service began creating super high quality sampled sounds that could be played inside of this Native Instruments sampler. The next few years would see more plugin companies form and classic plugins release. The next year though, in 2008, the release of VST 3.0 came. This update introduced the support of MIDI 2.0 features like note expression, which offered a more dynamic and human sound, as well as native VST sidechaining. One thing I didn't even realise is that it wasn't till VST 3.0 release that we would see window resizing in plugins. Once again, we'd seen a huge jump in the complexity of VSTs and what they were capable of. Between the years of 2010 and 2020, we'd see favourites like Serum, Shaperbox, Electra X and loads more release. We'd also see free plugins become a lot more common around this time, with most companies offering some sort of free software to get you into their ecosystems. And this is when it happened. The origin of the subscription dark age is hard to pinpoint because so many companies had moved to it around the same time. The world was changing though. Blockbuster Video had closed and Netflix was here. Subscription models were popping up everywhere. This business model would unfortunately become the semi-norm in the music production world, with majority of plugin companies offering some sort of subscription service. The oldest plugin company of them all, Waves, had to do a huge U-turn in 2023 when they announced that their library of hundreds of plugins would be switching to subscription only. This led to huge uproar from the producer community and would lead to Waves reversing the decision only a few days later. Then there's like Output that have subscription only plugins such as Arcade. I know there are customers out there who like and benefit from this subscription model, but I just wish that developers would offer it alongside a perpetual license. So we're pretty close to the current times now, but there is still one shift that I want to talk about. This is probably going to be one of the biggest changes to plugins, and that's the implementation of AI. We're entering a time where synth plugins can mimic real sounds with AI generated presets. There are plugins that can generate human voices from text. There's even full-on text-to-sample plugins that can generate short melodies out of thin air. And what you need to remember is that this is plugin AI in its infancy too. This AI breakthrough's kind of got producers split, with some people loving it and others thinking that it's cheating. I remember the days when producers would say that using loops or MIDI is cheating, and the whole AI thing feels like that all over again. So yeah, that is the history of the audio plugin. If you enjoyed that trip down memory lane, then hit the like button before you leave. And if you've got any suggestions for other videos like this, then drop them in the comments. I actually got the idea for this video while doing some research on the history of Reason. If you'd like to check that video out, then I'll just put it up in the corner. Thank you all for watching, and I'll hopefully catch you in the next one.